Hello, everyone. This is Azren here with Kolton. We've been wanting to
Hello.
record a podcast I've wanted to record a podcast with you for a little while. I keep thinking about it. I guess we have. We've done the Blackfoot ones, but I
Mhm.
wanted to do one on my podcast. And so, yeah, everyone, this is Kolton, and Catherine will probably join us soon too. We don't really have a plan of where this is going to go, but I think Kolton is a fascinating human. Catherine is definitely a fascinating human. In fact, here she is. Let me let her in. And we're just going to talk and see where our conversation takes us. Every time we talk, we have very fascinating conversations, always go in interesting directions. So we'll see how this goes. So I don't know if Catherine, you can hear us.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you guys hear me?
Oh,
Yay, we hear you too. Good.
hey.
Oh my God. Sorry, I just
Yeah,
had a little technical malfunction.
that's okay. How are you guys doing? It's already recording, Catherine. Hope that's okay. We don't really have a
Hmm.
plan for this. We're gonna chit chat and post whatever we talk about, just for fun.
No problem. As long as the equipment works. Because I happened to buy myself a new microphone almost for the occasion, but hopefully that's going to do more good than bad. Otherwise, I'm good.
Nice. What's new with you guys? How's life?
Mm, Pretty busy, but Thanksgiving week is next week here, so we get the entire week off. So I'm looking forward to that to just sleep and not have to go to class.
Yeah, that's pretty much the best vacation plan, isn't it?
Yeah, just to get a week of sleep in.
Do you
Mm.
not usually sleep very much?
Mm, well, I do, but when I like to sleep, I like to sleep like as long as I possibly can. Like if I don't have to be anywhere, it's pretty common for me to like sleep 12 hours. Um, it's just kind of how I operate. But when I have to go to class and whatnot, I obviously can't, go into a mini coma, so I have to settle for like 8.
Hmm,
That is
interesting.
actually relatable. I'm the same myself, to be fair, because unless I need to wake up, I
Mhm.
can spend the day sleeping pretty much.
Yeah, I
But
could.
but I guess it's because we have a lot going on in our brains and things of the kind. It's kind of like we
Mhm.
think that we can sleep forever, but given the opportunity of sleeping normal schedules, I guess, and like having a proper rest daily, we'd probably
Mhm.
settle for like less, I guess. That's
Well,
my running theory.
yeah, my sleeping schedule is really weird. It's like if I don't have anything to do, then I can easily sleep from, I don't know, midnight that night until like 2 or 3 the next day. Um, but if I don't do that, then the alternative is like 3 hours of sleep because I'll be like up the entire night thinking just about any given subject. So I either get like no sleep or like 15 hours straight, no in
Hmm.
between.
What do you think about?
Mm, well, generally, what was I thinking about last night? What does keep me up? Generally, I'll get um, curious about something and then I'll start thinking about it. And then I'll think about what I know about it. And then sometimes I'll ask myself a question. And I'll think, well, I don't really know anything about that. And then I'll look it up and then I'll go down like some weird rabbit hole and then go that leads me. And so typically what I'm thinking about, it'll start with something that I was thinking about earlier in the day, whether it's something somebody mentioned or just something I watched, think about that and then kind of just it just like snowballs into more and more.
Hmm. Because some people, when they're thinking at night, they're thinking of things that they're worrying and they're dwelling.
Mm.
But
No,
you're just curious. You're like, oh, I
yeah,
wonder how this works.
mine is just more. I've yeah, I don't really ever stay up at night over worrying. It's more so just like curiosity that just doesn't turn off.
It's a very interesting expression that you keep on having because I do, well, as it is known, I teach you as well as Spanish, for example, and I love it that you use the expression I ask myself or I wonder I would assume in all the languages that you speak, you use the same one, but it's kind of like you ask yourself questions all the time. And it's one of the features of your speech that, for example, to me has always been striking, because it's kind of like, that's you, that's how you express yourself. And I don't know, like, and then you end up saying, it's like, oh, well, that's what I do with my life, basically. I ask myself things.
Huh, interesting. I never knew that I did that a lot,
I mean,
but I guess it makes sense. Like even in Blackfeet, I'll be sitting there to myself, just talking to myself, and then I'll be thinking, oh, Nitaximps, and then whatever it is, and then Nitaximps just means I'm thinking about or whatnot. So,
You're also very curious, right, Catherine?
yes, I relate to, first and first, I do relate to both sides of the story. I either worry about things that will happen tomorrow because I'm big on that. That's my specialty. But I'm also quite curious. Like I can find myself in a weird rabbit hole. I can remember something, especially I don't think when I go to sleep, but if I wake up randomly in the middle of the night, I will then remember something random that, as Kolton says, like somebody mentioned, or I don't know, that I have a weird memory of, or something like that, and then I'll investigate and try to learn everything possible and impossible about it. Yeah, that's relatable. That's the... Azren, how about you? Do you ever fall into rabbit holes like that?
I do, but yeah, not the same way that Colton does, or that you do. Like I'm sitting there at night and I wonder for the whole night. That's not that common, but I am very curious and I wonder I'm super curious and I wonder about so many things. I'll be like, oh, I wonder if this would work if I tried this, or I wonder if often I'll wonder about things that I could do differently in my day-to-day life. Could be work related, personally, and I'll like try to see, like, wonder what'll happen if I do this, wonder what'll happen if I do that, I wonder what'll happen if I do this, and I'll try.
It's really interesting, I think, because everybody has like the thought pattern that can well, if you know the person well enough, you can kind of notice, and then you can look at their life and their behavior, and it will basically transpire. Like you say that, oh, you're wondering about, oh, what can I do differently and something like that, and you're quite entrepreneurial, so it's kind of like you think and then you behave the same way.
What you think and you behave, what does that mean? You think and behave the same way, what do you mean?
In a sense that, like, for example, from what I've known you anyway, is you always try to reinvent yourself constantly. Like it's never enough for you to stop on like one model of something. You're constantly trying to reinvent it, and that's where you say that that's where curiosity goes to, isn't it? It's kind of like, well,
yeah, that's true. Yep, I try to reinvent, not necessarily reinvent, but just improve, like improve things personally, work-wise, like improve things, make things better. Is that what you guys get curious about? When you're curious about things, like how do you make something better? That's what I get curious about. How do you make something better? It'll be something.
Mine is totally random. Like it can be mostly, maybe it's like a historical person that I remembered or something like that. It has no relation with anything at all. But like, for example, this one day I went on a like investigation almost about the person called Kaspar Hauser. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, but that's basically a person who it's a person who appeared in a street out of nowhere. Nobody knows who he is and everything. He can only say one phrase, and then this whole rabbit hole unravels, that he learns how to speak, he learns how to interact with people and everything like that. And there are theories whether he's faking it, whether he's not faking it. And me, as a person who's interested in linguistics, it's a super curious. I was like, oh, well, if you only could say one phrase at the beginning, somebody needed to teach him that. And how did this teacher, this person, like came through with this phrase, or what happened? And yeah, that took me, I was fascinated by that for a good couple of hours, I must say. Did it help me anyhow? No, I just know now. It's kind of, it has no practical appliance, but well, those things mostly, like the things that are not necessarily related to anything, but I kind of related to what my main interests are, or about, I don't know, about some like new like discoveries in the real, like of mental health, for example. I'm really interested in that too, and this kind of stuff.
What do you get curious about, Colton?
For me, my curiosity starts when I'm kind of thinking about something that's relevant to my life, whether it's like somebody that I talked to earlier in the day, or like if I talk through a lesson, sometimes if I'm when you're not really doing anything and then you kind of just idle, so your brain kind of wanders off, I'll go back to those interactions and whatnot, and I'll think about them, kind of replay them in my head, think about what I should have said differently, and then I'll kind of ask myself, well, did that make sense? And then I'll kind of re-explain it to myself to make sure that I understand it correctly. And if there's like nothing that I understand and relaying everything out, then I ask myself about that, or I'll go back. But yeah, generally it'll start with just me remembering something that happened recently, and then I'll ask myself questions about it, like why is it like this, or is there any kind of meaning to this? For instance, there's a lot of magpies around campus, so you see them whenever you like leave, and so I get so when I come back and I'll kind of think about how many magpies I saw throughout the day, I'll think back, can I remember any stories about magpies? Like, I remember there was a story in Blackfeet culture about magpies, and then I'll think about that. I was like, can I remember that? And I was like, well, you heard it so long ago. And then sometimes I'll be able to remember it, sometimes I won't. And then I'll think, well, did you ever hear that in fully Blackfeet, or did you hear it in English? And then if the answer is no, you haven't heard it in Blackfeet, then I'll try to translate it. Or if I'm not going down that route, then I'm going, well, what do magpies do? What's it like to be a magpie? Yeah, a lot of what I think about and what interests me and like sparks my curiosity is what it would be like to be in somebody else's shoes. Because I see that, well, not only obviously in animals, but in other people, it seems like everything is so different. And then I think, well, why are they different? What makes them different? And that's another thing that kind of occupies my mind a lot. Like, what made things the way they are today? And then I'll just think about possible factors that could have come up to this, like reasons. For instance, something that I think about a lot when I'm thinking about other people is the nature versus nurture argument. I kind of think, well, are they like that because they're raised in that environment? And some people, I'll look at them and think, well, okay, well, that makes sense. They were put in that environment, so obviously they turned out that way. But then other people, you put them in an environment and they don't turn out like that environment. They're like completely different. So it's like, well, how did they get like that? Are they genetically like meant to act like that? And so I'll start to think about that more and more. And then sometimes I'll think, oh, well, nurture makes more sense. And then I'll think of an example. Well, nature kind of has something to do with it. And so it's kind of like
You're trying to find like it sounds like you're trying to figure out the nature of reality.
Yeah,
that's what it sounds like. You're trying to solve the nature of reality is what it sounds like.
Yeah, I'm either thinking about people, the brain, or physics. It's typically, or language. I think typically make up like everything that we see. And so that's
people, brain, language, or what?
And physics.
And physics.
Because something I realized recently is that language is really an imperfect way to look at the world. Like, it's not really a representation of reality, is something that I've come to. And I think that's a really interesting thing
sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I'm done. Yeah, so.
No, it kind of also, it's also a thing that I'm really passionate about, that's why I jumped in. There is some, if I hear something that like I really like and really enjoy talk about, I just like can't help it. Sorry, didn't mean to. So for me, for example, it's like very similar. I think that language is the only tool that is used also to create the tool. I don't know how to explain that better, but for example, linguistics is the only science that has to apply itself to itself. So kind of like in physics, at least, we see the matter, we see everything, all the tangible objects, we can make experiments with them and everything like that. But with linguistics, it's kind of like this, the thing is also the means, and it's also the means to convey the message and everything like that. But I don't necessarily think that language is imperfect in representing the reality, but more so I think the reality is perceived but by us as human beings through the apparatus that we have. Like we have the eyes, we have the ears, we have them better or worse, we have the brain, which differs dramatically. And I agree with you, Kolton, as like I'm fascinated by, that's why I'm fascinated, for example, by psychology and like cognitive science, neuroscience, things of the kind, because each person's brain easily can be like so dramatically different and so dramatically similar to like one another, let alone to try and describe like all of them using only like one sample or something like this. So I think it's not that language is imperfect as a tool, but I think a human being is not yet developed enough to comprehend the reality through the means that they have.
Yeah, sense. That kind of one of the ways that I come to the conclusion that language, it's probably like the best tool that we could come up with, but as humans, I don't think our brains could ever fully grasp reality, and so language is like the best thing that we have. But something that kind of made me come to this conclusion, I remember I either read about it or listened to it. In toddlers, up until I believe until the age of 3, when they're taking in input from the world, they don't really have that part of the brain that can separate objects, that can and so they just take in like raw sensory data, and so they're kind of seeing, whereas we as adults, or with more developed brains, we could see something and say, well, that's a bed, that's the ground, that's a person. Whereas babies don't really have the ability to differentiate between all of that. They're just taking in like all of the information. And so I kind of realized, well, there must have been a point in time in human development, or the development of an individual, where their brain just learns to differentiate between the objects and to decide which stimulus to pay attention to and which stimulus to kind of ignore. And so I think just the way that our brains come up and then we use reality or language with that, it's just not a perfect way to really get a grasp of reality. I think because our brains simplify reality, if that makes sense, automatically, just so it's like easier for us to go throughout the day.
I also think verbal fluency, and I don't mean fluency as in you speak a language fluently. I mean verbal fluency as in how, even in your first language, how good are you with words? Like how well do you put words together? How well can you articulate an idea? Can you be poetic? Do you use metaphors? Can you make people feel a certain way because of the word choice that you used? That you used.
Case in point.
not that you used, not that you used. That you used, right? Anyway, and I was thinking about this because well, you made me think of a couple things. So that's the first thing. The second thing you made me think of is, so a few months ago, I started to think a lot about telling the truth, which I've talked to both of you about in varying degrees. And I've been really focused on trying to make sure that when I speak, I'm telling the truth. And that was something that I started thinking about a few months ago. And I noticed that when I would pause and think and tell the truth to different people, there'd always be a very strong reaction, usually positive. It would always end up being positive, but it'd always cause some kind of a reaction. Whereas right now, if I say like, "Oh, I like your hair," and it would be like, "Oh, thanks," and that would be like very small. But when you get to a deep truth, when you go as deep as you can and you speak in those deep truths, it always creates a very powerful reaction from the other person. And there's lots of examples I've had over the past 4 months of that. And so I've been talking to people about this as well in my life. And one question people have asked me is like, well, how do you get to that deep level truth? So I remember someone asking this question, and they were telling me that they read something I wrote, and they're telling this personal story of how they don't like someone in their life. They're like, well, my truth is I don't like them. Like, that's just true. And I was like, well, that's not true. They're like, what do you mean? I was like, well, it's probably not true that you don't like them. And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, it's probably not true because, like, okay, tell me more. And she goes, well, I don't like that this person says this to me all the time. And I was like, oh, okay. So it's not they don't like them. You don't like that they say this to you. And she's like, yeah, but then she went on. And then the more we talked, eventually got down to like a deeper level truth, which is really true. And the surface level is, well, it's too general. It's not really true. Truth is something deeper. So, and that I tie that to verbal fluency or verbal, maybe not fluency, but ability, I guess, to be able to figure out and find the right words to articulate what's in, what you really want to articulate. And I think that goes to Kolton's point of language not being a perfect tool, because if you can't find the right words and not just the right words, but the right tone, the right word choice, and the right order, and then the right body language would also be a piece of it. It's not just a spoke. Like, if you can't really create a nice masterpiece with that, even if you do create the masterpiece, well, let's say you don't to start. If you don't create that masterpiece, then it definitely is not a perfect representation of what you wanted to say. And if you did create the masterpiece, even then, like, I don't know if it's a perfect representation. It's just a very artful, skillful representation of it. And that leads to one's ability to use words and communicate, right? So if we were all perfect communicators with our language, maybe it would be a perfect representation. But because we're not, it's a crude representation, maybe.
It's really curious. I'm actually, it's really interesting that we touched upon the topic of truth. My now post dissertation was about the two words in Russian language that I believe represent the linguistic worldview of Russian really well, because I worked a lot in my research on the topic of like linguistic worldviews. So not only language as a whole is an imperfect tool, but also if we compare things across languages, we all see things differently because we have different means of explaining it. And it's really funny because the word truth in Russian can be translated into two words, which is going to be, well, let's say I'm going to pronounce them, but word one would be pravda, which is a specific, like a truth that is objective to one. And it's not an absolute truth at all. It's just like, okay, well, I have my truth, you have your truth, everybody has their truth, the news have their truth, this newspaper will have that truth, and then that newspaper would have that one, and they're all different, and they're not all incorrect necessarily, because what they're reporting is true to them. But then there is a second word that is istina, which is this deep truth, absolute truth, that is in our worldview, for example, is only known to, well, call it God, call it universe, call it like the great order of things, like whoever wants to choose what terminology for this one. And me as a person, for example, whenever Azren, you say like, oh, I decided to speak the truth, to me as a person was one of my, so to speak, thinking languages is Russian. I can't translate the sentence to my brain. It's like, okay, well, it is impossible for you to always speak, for example, the truth, because you don't know it, nobody does. But also if you always speak truth number one, which is like a particular truth, then you succeed, because whatever you say is true by default, because you said it. It's your truth. It's something that you have to say. And it's really interesting. It's like, that's why I think it's very typical to me to I don't know if you guys are similar like this, probably you are, is that whoever comes to you as an educator, as a communicator, as a person, you try to, as a recipient, you try to understand them as well as you can. And if you also have certain compassion towards them, you can accept and understand any sort of a message if you want to. So it's not only on the communicator, but I think it's also on the recipient. And for me, for example, it's really easy, even if I disagree with the person, it's like, okay, well, that's your truth, I'll have mine. We disagree, but nobody lied anyway. I don't know if any of that made sense, but well, tried my best to convey. It wasn't perfect, probably, at the end of the day. Well.
I think that's very interesting.
I heard this idea, and I don't know who the originator of the idea is, because I don't think the person who said the idea is the originator. I don't think so. But I heard this idea from Jordan Peterson, who was saying that you get closer to finding the truth through dialogue. So one person has their truth, and it's true for them, right? For them, but it might not be the truth. It's a truth, I guess. And then you have person two who has another truth, which is not wrong, but it's two separate things that are true. And then when you put them together, you get to something closer to what the actual truth is. Because then you talk and you realize, oh, well, like when you talk to someone, I don't know if you can relate to this, probably yes. Like someone you really disagree with on something, but then you talk to them, and then in the at the end of the conversation, you're like, okay, I'm still 95% right, and they're five. They had like 2 good points, and they're like kind of right about those, and they're thinking the same thing about you. They're like, I'm still 95% right, but he made like 3 good points or 1 good point or whatever. And then you walk away and you're like, you're basically still think the same way, but like you kind of shifted a little bit in one direction because you're like, okay, well, maybe I was a little wrong about this one thing or that 2 things. My mom used to say this hilarious thing when I was growing up. Whenever I'd be like stubborn or something, she'd be trying to tell me something. She'd be like, Azren, the door's closed. You're not like listening. Can you open it like this much? Like, can you like open it a crack and like just open a crack and peek through the crack and just maybe listen to what I'm trying to say. Like just like open it 1 inch or 1 centimeter. I'd be like, okay, fine. I listen just a tiny bit, right? So
it makes sense. I think the door metaphors that you used, I don't know, Kolton, if you agree with that, but like more languages you speak, more doors you can potentially open to the communicators in your life. That like more skilled you are at conveying your message and in comprehending, the more versions of reality you can absorb and you can study and you can kind of get contagious by, so to speak. Because like I would talk to anyone, like you, and I'm sure that you guys as well. It's like if a student comes around and they have a story to tell and they want to just like to have like the conversational lesson, for example, whatever the opinion they will voice, they will have a listening ear and a teacher, yes or yes, but like that's a job, there's a description. And then whatever they say, Azren, as you said, like if you leave the door open, maybe someone will enter you anyway a little bit. Like maybe you'll disagree, maybe you'll agree, but at least you'll learn something.
On a lighter topic, I'm learning Russian.
I've noticed. This is so crazy. How is it going? Is it difficult for you?
No, it's pretty interesting so far. So I'll actually pull it up on my phone here.
I appreciate the words that you've sent me.
Oh
and
yeah,
all of them. It's like the choice of them, brilliant.
Oh man, so here's what. So okay, I have a funny story for you guys, and I'm curious what you guys think of this. So, so okay, how do I say this? When I'm learning Russian, I'm like super beginner, and I did this in Japanese as well. I did this in Japanese and in Russian, and I've noticed this. It wasn't on purpose, but it just happened this way. I don't necessarily learn what's useful. I just learn what I think is hilarious and fun. So, for example, when I learned Japanese, I was testing out a learning method for learning languages, and I was curious to see if it would work. And I wanted to see like, what if you learned a language the same way a 2-year-old would learn a language? And a 2-year-old, because I had a 2-year-old cousin at the time, he'd walk around the house and he'd just like point at stuff and be like, and you tell him what it's called, and he would just repeat it. And then he'd pick it up, and then he would try and do something with it. Didn't know what it was. And then we would react, and then he would say something, and then we would say something, and he'd copy what we said. It's kind of this weird way to naturally acquire the language. I thought, well, I wonder if an adult did that, would that work? So I was learning Japanese in that way. I would just grab stuff around me that would interest me. I learned a couple phrases like "what is that" and stuff like that, and I would grab stuff in my surroundings that interested me, and then I would like do stuff. I broke a crystal in my house, and I was like, "Oh no!" And I was like, "Hey, how do I say I broke the crystal?" Like that's like one of my first sentences was like, "I broke a crystal." I was playing with my toys, and I was like, how do you say like a snake ate an alligator? That just sounds hilarious. Oh, the alligator ate the snake. I was like, oh, and then I'll like play with the alligator and the snake. It was so random. And that's how I was learning Japanese. The only thing I remember in Japanese now is, hey, look, there's a chicken. That's all I know how to say. Like everything else I've forgotten. And I know how to say alligator and snake and stuff like that, like basic random things that make no sense. So for Russian, I'm trying to learn the pronunciation first. Like I want to get and I always do that. I want to get my ears used to the language, and can I like hear it? Can I say it? Can I articulate it? And so I found this Anki deck that teaches you pronunciation, but the words they're using to teach you
So
pronunciation are random. And I'm like, I love this. This is like so like I know gnome, I know voron, right? I know like
they're
mierkvai,
clusters
like
though.
yeah,
Not that that's going to be, but what these are clusters. Like these are the consonant clusters that are super difficult to like. They are throwing you into the pool and teaching you how to swim, because these ones arguably are the most difficult things to pronounce, like the clusters of consonants and everything like that. They're like, okay, well, if you learn that, then the rest of the language is going to be easy. No problem with that. Like if you can say zruf, then you're golden.
I know that's an explosion.
I was like, what? And you were sending me this messages, and I was like, what are you doing? Azren, we're so polar in our approaches to learning languages, because I can't do anything without a system. Like I cannot acquire a skill if I don't know exactly what I might like, how even if it's something like, for example, I did learn how to make basic jewelry. Now I work in the jewelry shop now and everything. So in order for me to do something like very craftsy, I need to know exactly what is going to be like in the final product. And unless I know the grammatical, that's why I prefer to learn grammar first in a language and then the pronunciation and whatnot, because the pronunciation I'll then catch up on by listening to people anyway, so that doesn't really matter. And
interesting.
Like to me, learning random words that don't have a visible connection to each other, I will die. It's such a nightmare, because like then how can I, but then the snake ate the alligator. I don't understand how do we come there? Where do we go? But I see our brains are different, and this is fascinating. Like it works for you and a different thing will work for me, and that's both are amazing. I think it's the correct answer.
How about you,
Kolton?
What do you do?
I have a different way of learning. It's more, I kind of more have what Azren has, where I just like go after what interests me. So I'll just think of something and then like look it up. And then that's typically the first step. And then I'll go through the grammar, and I really like grammar. I think I started liking grammar when I started learning Blackfeet more advancedly, because it felt like a puzzle that I got to solve, and it was always consistent. It reminded me of math. And one of the reasons that I like math is because there was always like some objective way to do it. There was like a set of systems that you had to do, and then just one little mistake can make it something completely different. And so I kind of really like that challenge of grammar. And so I typically start with grammar when I'm learning a language first, and then add on vocabulary. But it's not really a systemized like, oh, well, I got to learn this and then I'll go on to this. It's just, I just kind of jump around. Like with Blackfoot, the way that kind of got me into grammar, I remember I was thinking, I didn't know, and like conjugation, I didn't know what that was. Like to me, I was just adding things to the words to say something else, even though that was conjugation, a term for it. Right. So for instance, the basic conjugation, which I've kind of figured out all of the grammar by myself. There's no really grammar teacher of Blackfoot. You kind of just have to look at it. And
you actually, Kolton, sorry to interrupt you. I always think it's so interesting that you're probably one of the only people in the world that actually know and can explain the grammar of Blackfoot.
I know, that's what I was.
Isn't that crazy?
About. It is kind of crazy. It's weird to think about. It's like one of the only people in the universe that can tell you VTA and how to like all these different weird things about Blackfeet. But anyway, so yeah, the way that I got into grammar is one of the basic grammar points of Blackfoot is when you add get to the beginning of a verb, it means the second person means you. And then another basic word in Blackfoot is oi, which means to eat. And so I thought, well, and then I remembered another word, kita kita matsuda, I'll see you later. The git is in the beginning. Gitsigako mem, I love you. The git is in the beginning. And I thought, oh, well, that's kind of similar to Spanish. And so maybe that's how it would work. And then I thought, well, how would I differentiate between a phrase like you eat and I eat you? Because it seems like they would both start and end the same.
Yes, I see.
They would both start the
Yep.
same way, and I'd be like, well, am I like saying the same thing? If I get doi means you're eating, but then I remember feeling horrified. I thought, am I accidentally saying I'm eating you when I say this? And so I asked my teacher at the time. I only took a couple lessons with him, but he explained to me VTA, and just that little piece of information was enough for me to go onto Wikipedia to like look through VTA, look what transitive things are, what animacy, inanimacy. Then I would go onto the dictionary, and then it would generally, in all of the examples that it gives you, it breaks it down. It says this is a verb, this is transitive, this is animate, this is a pronoun, whatnot. And then from there I was able to kind of backtrack and figure out what those words meant and how to use them. But yeah, it's definitely more of a, like definitely do kind of go to grammar first, but it's not systemized like Catherine. It's more crazy like Azren's. Like when I learned Spanish, I remember I was trying it Catherine's method, and I was going along slowly but surely. But the way that I got conversational and the way that I was able to talk to you from like the beginning of the class to the end of class in just Spanish, I remember it's because it was either a week or 2 weeks before my senior year started, and I started Riverdale on Netflix, and I watched it in like an entire weekend in Netflix with Spanish like captions instead. And just by binging through that entire series, like 6 seasons in like 3 days, I was able to like become
to figure it out.
Yeah, I was able to get conversationally fluent in Spanish. And I remember the week after I went to Catherine, just feeling like I cheated in a way, like, oh well,
no, not at all. No, I was happy. At the end of the day, you are all students and you're all teachers, and as teachers, you know that the greatest happiness for you is like it's like the same. I think the good doctor doesn't want to see their patients anymore. Like the good doctor, the ultimate goal of a doctor is to see the patient cured. And I guess the ultimate goal of a teacher is just to have a conversation with a student in their language and keep them company, and they know the language, and brilliant. Like if you do achieve the goals that you have, that's what makes me happy. Like it doesn't matter if it's my method or if you just, I don't know, met a fairy in the forest and they told you the I don't know, the truth of the universe. I don't know, that's great as well. That works for me. And also I'm so fascinated by this conversation because I'm the exact opposite of you, Kolton, as well, because I need to learn the theory first, but then comes the curiosity, because I will binge learn a systematic, like a system of a grammar of a language that I want to acquire. For example, but because I learned, for example, Spanish in the university, and then I learned Galician also through the book and everything in that. But then in my real life, or when I'm watching something, when I then go on to live normally, I'm fascinated by encountering the elements that I've learned. Like I remember, I was always been this way. I remember I had a pen friend from New Zealand when I was, I don't know, ever since I was 14 or something like that, well, by internet and everything this. And then this one time he said, and I remember it vividly to this day, and it excites me and like makes me happy genuinely in my life. Like you can imagine. I remember him saying me by text, by this Christmas, we will have been talking for 10 years, something like that. And I was like, oh my God, that's present, like, that's future perfect continuous. That's insane. That's incredible. That's a native. Nobody prompted him. Nobody asked him to do that. And he himself just said, we will have been talking. Isn't that great? And I tell this story to people. And they're like, yeah, great. Good job, Catherine. Yay. Good for you. Because I genuinely, whenever I see, like, for example, the word that I've learned from the book, or the grammar structure that I've learned from the book, and I then encounter it in real life on film and in music. That's why, for example, I remember songs really well. And I pretty much have a library in my brain of the grammatical constructions through songs. Because anytime I hear one in the song, I'm like, oh, that's actually, that's a modal verb. Or that's, I don't know, es el imperfecto de subjuntivo. Wow, amazing. that is a good day for me, genuinely. I mean, the more I leave, the more I realize that my method probably needs to be adapted. Like, I like the system and I try to bring system into everything I do, even though it may be like a slightly chaotic system, as absurd as it sounds, but I try to make sure that my students get exposure to information progressively. But more I leave, the older I get, the more I start to realize that not necessarily all the brains work the same as mine does. And that's why probably it doesn't really work for everyone. And my next venture, I guess, is to try and use a different method and try to be like as curious and random as you, Azren, or to try and learn grammar a posteriori, for example. I don't know, that could be interesting. Probably wouldn't work for me, but I don't know, who knows?
I want to run I want to run two different ideas by you. I'm actually curious because I'm trying to refine these ideas in my own head. Maybe you can help me. So I'll share the two ideas and you can both comment on whatever you want. So first idea is this. This one's a little bit easier to articulate. How much does someone's learning preferences matter when they haven't successfully learned a language? That's a conundrum because you can say, well, I like to learn languages like this. And if you've learned languages like that, it's like, cool, great, more power to you. But if someone who's unsuccessful in learning languages, like they've been, or a language even, not even languages, but they're trying to learn a language, they've been trying for 4 years, 3 years, whatever, and they're not successful by their own definition, not even by mine, like by their own words, right? They're saying, oh, I'm not, I can't even hold a simple conversation. I can't even do like, and maybe, and God, as I'm saying this out loud, actually, it is hard to articulate because maybe they are successful and their perception's just wrong, right? So, but let's say it's been, okay, here's a good way to think of it. If you're to look at language learners who all go learn a language, right? And they spend 4 years, some people learn way slower than average, like way slower, and it's due to their methods. It's not due to their brain or anything. It's due to how they've gone about it. And it's pretty clear that's the case, right? So then it's like, well, how much do your preferences matter? Because it's not working for you, right? Working in the sense of you're not progressing very much. And if you're okay with that, fair enough, then it's working for you. But if you're not, then then you have to ask a question like maybe your preferences don't matter as much. That's something I'm trying to figure out. And the second thing, and this is more just interesting, is this is so hard. I just made a podcast about this yesterday. It was so hard to figure out how to say this. How do you package the information that you learn or teach? I'll give you an example. Since you all speak Spanish, right? Anyone who knows anything about Spanish grammar, even if you're a beginner, anyone who knows anything about Spanish grammar will agree that when you learn conjugations, you go yo, tú, él, ella, usted, nosotros, vosotros, ustedes, ellos, ellas. We all agree that's the order. If you walked into my class and I was teaching tú, nosotros, ustedes, you'd be like, oh, what's he do? Like it would be like, that's different. What's really different? Like, why did we agree that's the order? And then here's another interesting one. When and why and how did we agree that we should package tenses as learning all the subject pronouns with one tense? Why was that the thing we agreed on? Why didn't we say yo and tú, right? So I and you, but for 6 tenses? Why not learn? So there's yo, tú, él, ella. Okay, él, ella is kind of the one conjugation. So yo, tú, él, ella, usted, right? Nosotros, vosotros, if you're learning it, ustedes, ellos, ellas. 6 conjugations, right? So why are we doing 6 subject pronouns in one tense? Would it not be better to do 1 or 2 subject pronouns across 3 or 6 tenses? In theory, 6 might be too many, but multiple tenses, very few subject pronouns, especially if you did yo and tú, or yo and usted if you want to do formal, you just pick those 2, and you learn across various tenses as a beginner. That actually one could make the argument that's a better packaging, better quote unquote, because it gives you a wider coverage in terms of what you can talk about. So and you can do that lots of ways. Like you look at the way we just structure the way we teach it or the way we learn it. Why is it structured that way? And if you change the structure, you change the learning. So those are two different things. So do your how much your preferences matter, and then the structure of why you package things the way they're packaged. Those are two things I'm thinking a lot about recently.
Can I answer first? I'm excited. This is my realm of.
Oh, okay. Jump in.
I'm gonna go with number 2 first, ironically,
Okay.
because first thing I'm going to say is like systems of education, systems of recording grammar, for example, came from the necessity of unifying the languages, of unifying the way that we essentially record our knowledge, and they came to I would bet somewhere around the times of Ilustración, Enlightenment. Jesus, I've forgotten the word. Anyway, and it was necessary in the times where the information could be only stored one way and one way only, which was books. Nowadays, we can access to information throughout any different channels, and this what makes us question the means of conveying the information. Back in the day, what you needed to do is you go to the library, you open the book has this format. This is the format that you're getting. You're not inventing anything. The book is this one. There is no other book. And I guess it's kind of like the similar argument, for example, as how to learn music. Like the music, the way it's taught in the majority of like big schools and everything like that, using the same method of learning the material, and the same method of conveying the material as Bach and Mozart back in their day. It hasn't changed at all. It is all archaic, and it has been this way since the beginning of time, and it has brought up many different musicians to this day. But also the people who learn music by themselves, for example, they can become brilliant instrumentalists, brilliant composers, and brilliant musicians as well. So neither of the answers would be the correct one. So for example, it doesn't really matter whether you're going to be using the traditional system, which is your tu, el, ello, usted, that comes from most likely the way they were recording Latin. And the way they recorded Latin, they decided to record French, they decided to record Spanish, they decided to record then English, they decided to record then Russian, and that's it. That's how that's what we got. There is no other. But for example, the method that you are suggesting, if it seems logical to you as a teacher, and if it seems logical to people as students, then why not? Then how about we invent a new rule now, and it's effective today? There is nothing. I don't think there is an objective truth in why does it go this way, and the response to that is because it has been this way historically. Does it mean it's brilliant? There is one argument that goes, don't fix it if it ain't broken. That's how I operate, for example. Like my whole life, my method of learning music, languages, and everything like that, probably I do the same as like people before me did. And I don't really look for something dramatically different because that would annoy me. Like, for example, if I came to class and the teacher would start from tu, I would leave. Well, I wouldn't. I'm too polite for that. I'll say, well, that's great. That's really fresh. I don't understand why is that, but well, can I please get my money back? Well, I don't know, because I do need, besides system and any sort of codification allows brain to be eased on the necessity of inventing the new things for each. Azren, do you remember when we were working on the book together?
Yep.
Do you remember the first thing I did? I was like, okay, everything needs to be unified. All the pages need to go in this order.
Yes, I remember that.
Because otherwise, my particular brain doesn't. That's keeps my particular brain and many others from learning how to learn. And they instantly can go and focus on the information instead, as to me. And that leads us to the first point. I'm sorry, Kolton, I'm just taking. I'll then basically give you the floor afterwards, and probably you'll disagree with me. But as to me, I think any sort of helping profession, such as teacher, psychologist, doctor, at the end of the day, we are there for the client. We're not there for our ego. I mean, I love my method. I think it's brilliant. I think I'm amazing, and I think I'm a spectacular teacher. Well, I don't really, but well, I can say so. But if the person in front of me doesn't benefit from it, and they personally don't enjoy it as much, and I can't convince them, and I can't, well, I guess I could make them try. I'll say, listen, I know you're not enjoying it, but like, how about you give it a go? And if it brings you the results that are better, then we can continue to do it this way. If you're not enjoying it, then there's nothing I can do about it. Probably you'll need a different specialist. That's not me. But I think that it has to be mostly the desire of the student. But if you believe that your expertise allows you to make an educated guess that you know better and you can actually help them, at least to not to persuade them necessarily, but kind of to sell the thing that you think will work to them. And it has to be their decision that they're like, okay, well, I don't think it will work, but whatever, I'll try it. And they try it, and maybe it works, and then great success. Or maybe they try it and it doesn't work, and then, well, otra vez será. It's like, like it's not the end of the world.
What do you think, Kolton?
I think people, for the second question, people like to, well, it's easier for our brains to think of things in categories, to break down all of the pronouns. I used to teach Blackfoot like that, where I teach all 6 conjugations, and I realized, well, there's not really 6 conjugations because, well, we have I, you, the plural of you, the we, he or she, and then the plural they, but then we also have the inclusive we. So then that's 7. And it's like, well, do you really want to teach 7? Then I thought about it some more, and I'm like, well, there's another conjugation. There's the obviative for the minor third person, and then the obviative for the plural. And so it was like, there's 9 conjugations that you'd kind of have to teach. The only reason that you're thinking of the first 6 is because you saw Spanish taught that way, like I, you. So then I thought, well, I kind of realized that after trying so hard to get my students to, memorize I, we, you guys, he/she, and then they, all of those conjugations, they didn't really need them at that point. And so I kind of switched. I don't remember when I made the switch, but maybe kind of recently, maybe kind of a while ago, where I'll kind of tie the personal pronouns to what they're doing. Like for conversational skills, we start out with the first person conjugation, and then work with questions like, what are you doing? And then it's easier to kind of work with that, to say, well, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And then you work with conjugation in that way, and then you kind of expand on conjugation to say, well, I ate, I'm eating, I will eat, I might eat, to find out all the different ways to say that. And then I build up. If my next thing is, well, I want to kind of introduce, we're talking about animals in simple sentences, then I use the third person conjugation, because you can obviously tie animals with and people with third person conjugation. And then when I move on to questions, then that's when I kind of go on to the second person. Because most of the time in languages, what I've noticed, not only in English but in Blackfoot, is we don't typically make that many statements about the second person. Majority of the time, if we're using the second person in a sentence, it's a question rather than a statement. The person you're talking to already kind of knows what it is about themselves, so there's not really anything you can.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
And so
It's
most of the
totally
time,
true.
And so most of the time when you're talking to them, it's a question. I've never really stated you're eating right now, because it's like, well, obviously. But I've asked, well, are you going to eat pretty soon? You eat. I never say anything like, you speak Blackfoot, speak English, because, well, yeah, but I have asked, do you speak English? Do you speak Blackfoot? And so once I realized, well, there's really no point in them knowing how to conjugate for the second person, until they're ready to ask questions. Then I just save it for the questions rather than, fully dive into it before they even have any words to use it. Otherwise, then they have kind of all that grammar knowledge, but like no tools to actually do anything with it. So that's what it's kind of my.
That's interesting because that's exactly you made me think of something interesting because yesterday I wrote a blog post about freezing up. So people who try to talk and then they can't because they get freeze, like and they freeze, right? And there are two things that come to mind when I think of freezing up. So the first thing that comes to mind is people don't have tools or strategies of what to do when they freeze up. They don't know what to do. So in Spanish, the easiest one to get unstuck, if you're stuck on grammar conjugations, if that's the freezing point, because you might freeze for a different reason. But if it's grammar, just say the infinitive of the verb and people will understand exactly what you said. They'll get it and you'll move on at the sentence, you're unstuck, and it's not perfect, but it's a solution. But the second thing is what Kolton has said about you have all this grammar knowledge, you don't have the tools to use it, which is exactly, I think, what happens to a significant percentage of language learners if they take a class, and that's how they learn. If they take classes, and they go to a traditional teacher, quote unquote, it's highly likely that they're going to be bombarded with grammar early on. And they have all this, and the longer they learn, the more grammar they know. But they don't have the ability, it's almost like there's pressure building up in the brain, but they don't have the way to open the door and allow the pressure to escape. If the mouth is your door, right? The door, you don't have the ability to open it and let that pressure come out. And so it just builds in their heads. When they try and talk, they can't because they haven't been given the key to open the door, right? And it's more like there's multiple doors because it's not like one door, one key, boom, it comes out. It's like there's like 600 doors and you open one and like a little bit of the pressure comes out. You need 600 different doors to open and you need all these little keys. And people, not everybody, but lots of people get stuck with all this grammar and then they just freeze up like, oh, is it yo tenía? No, yo tuve. Oh, I shouldn't say yo tuve. My teacher said I don't have to say yo. Right, okay. So tuve, or is it, what was I trying to say? I was trying to say that. Yo tenías? No. Oh, I think it is tenía. Oh, no, I can't say yo. Tenía or tuve. Oh, this is so hard.
I just came up with something else as well, that I think our educational system back in Russia is very focused on narrative and it's very focused on, that's why, for example, to me it's evident, why do you need, and here you are eating an apple and everything like that, because we see reading books, for example, or like fiction and creating fiction as a valid practice, so to speak. Like, for example, I never learned languages to speak them necessarily primarily. Like, my goal has never been only conversation, but it's kind of also reading. And that's why it will make sense, for example, for us to, and for many students of mine who are like Slavic, to learn all the grammar and all the conjugations, because it's not necessarily they're going to open the wolf first. They're going to be perceiving the literature, the fiction and things of the kind where the narrative is exposed to them first. And in order to navigate in this world of descriptions, for example, we do need to learn grammar first. And I just came up as well. Like, for example, what you guys are saying is totally 100% correct. If you want to learn language for speaking first and then perceiving the things later. And for us, it has always been like, I want to read, because usually, I don't know if you guys had a pleasure to teach anyone from a similar background, but usually when you ask for a person to state their goals, many students of mine who come from my homeland and all the neighboring countries, many of them will mention something like, oh, I would really like to read in English, or would really like to read in Spanish. I would really like to watch TV in Spanish, and I would really like to, before they will say, I like to order coffees in a restaurant. Well, nowadays it is changing, I guess, because nowadays learning language is much more practical, I guess. But this is something, I guess, that differentiates the methods that are more applicable for these kind of learners and that kind of learners. Because at the end of the day, because Kolton, you made me think about that, because I was like, well, actually, where would I see, oh, you are, or he is reading, or I don't know, you are drinking a coffee? When we create our thought patterns in our head.
Mhm.
It's like, oh well, what are you doing here? Like, I'm kind of like, you are, and then you respond to, well, at least in my brain, I don't know, you guys will probably may think in images, some people think in images and in colors and shapes. Mine is dialogue. Mine is in all three languages that I know, and sometimes in the emergent ones will subtitle me where you are looking at me, and I know I want to know all of that because I need it for my fluency goals.
Yeah, you
for
would
example.
teach you if you're teaching someone to read and that was the primary goal and not speaking, you would teach the conjugations and you would teach because you have time to read them and go, wait, what was that? Oh, that's that conjugation. Okay, so then I used to have a dog when I was younger, and he to me gave. Oh, he gave me. He to me gave. Oh, he gave me el medio. Okay, okay. And my dog gave me a birthday. That's such a strange sentence. A birthday gift. My dog doesn't. You know what I'm saying, though. Dogs don't give birthday gifts, but you get the picture. Yeah, that makes. You would teach it differently if reading was the.
Because
Probably
I
would teach
try
it differently.
in my method, for example, I try to blend all four skills because I think it is important for the development of the fluency. Everybody reads, wanted or not wanted. Everybody listens and everybody speaks and everybody does all four simultaneously. So they expand their vocabulary, the grammar and everything like that all across the board. But that's where I probably lack because it's not as conversational as different methods. Although lately I've been trying to force myself to shift more towards like, okay, well, these people are going to travel next month. They're not going to be reading anything, Catherine. Let's do conversation only. And then I'll ease up on grammar, for example, in that case, because obviously. But to my personal preference is the opposite way around.
What do you think, Kolton? What's going through your mind? Kolton's a listener. I was listening. Sorry, random story about Kolton. Then I'll put it to you, Kolton. Kolton is telling me that in his college initially he didn't really know anyone and he didn't really have any friends initially. And then he was saying that because Kolton's quite intelligent, he's quite bright, and he's saying that some of the other bright people that he knew or that he'd seen in his college, he didn't really want to talk to them much because some of them seemed like know-it-alls. And I was like, well, Kolton, there's probably other like people that are bright like you and that aren't know-it-alls and you can be friends with them. He said, yeah, but I just want to sit there and mostly listen and I don't really talk. I wouldn't look to the person next to me and talk to them. I'd more just kind of be listening. And if someone else is like me, they also wouldn't talk to me. So I would never meet someone like me because we would never talk to each other. And I'm seeing like Kolton listening. I was like, oh, he's probably like got all these things going through his mind. Anyway, what's going through your mind, Kolton?
As of the second, well, with that story, I kind of forgot the original question, so I already lost that train of thought. But when you're talking about something going in my mind, I remember earlier when we were talking about languages, I was thinking about another language that I kind of learned in a really weird way, and it's Portuguese, specifically Brazilian Portuguese. And I don't speak it, but I know a weird amount of it because I listen to a lot of songs in Portuguese, and so like I'll look through the lyrics and then just watch the songs over and over, and then I'll think, hey, that looks like Spanish, that sounds like Spanish, and then I'll look, well, why are they different? For instance, like I remember seeing a word in Portuguese spelled like this, choré, which I guess is
interesting.
Lloré.
Yeah.
In which is I cried, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. Then I saw something else, like something that said chegou versus llegó. And so I finding stuff like that, I'd just really get interested in. So even though I'd see that in a song, I'd go look it up, and then I'd look up the history of like Portuguese language, and then exactly when it would split off from Spanish, what makes it different from Spanish. And then I'd also look up some of the conjugation rules and how it differs from Spanish. And then, yeah, just listening to a wide variety of Portuguese music, I picked up a lot of grammar rules and a lot of vocabulary. And I don't think I could speak it, but I mean, I feel like there's enough in my brain that I could probably say.
You just need to binge watch Riverdale for a weekend, and
yeah, I just gotta binge watch some Portuguese Riverdale and I'll have it.
Kolton, let's exchange. You teach me Blackfoot, I teach you Galician. That's going to be, I think
Definitely.
that the perfect blend.
The Creole language of the both.
Yeah.
Blackfeet Portuguese.
You know, Colton,
Nice.
remember Blaze?
Yeah.
So those so Blaze, Catherine, he's another Blackfoot speaker, and for a little while, and he probably like at the end of this year, like in December. So he's made some Blackfoot. We have a Blackfoot podcast, by the way. Fun fact.
Oh,
Yeah, well, more Colton. I'm not really there much, but Colton and Blaze have mostly Colton has a Blackfoot podcast, and sometimes Blaze, and sometimes I'm there, but mostly Colton has a Blackfoot podcast, and Blaze has been there and Blaze does a lot of work on language revitalization, like a lot. Like he like that's his whole master's thesis is on language revitalization. He spends like 60 hours a week on language revitalization. Like that's his more than full-time job is revitalizing Blackfoot. That's what he does. And why did I bring up Blaze? Oh crap! Why did I bring up Blaze? Oh no, I had such a relevant thing to say, and now I forgot it. Oh yes, the Creole. So Colton, Blaze used to teach Japanese exchange students Blackfoot, and they were all fascinated to learn. So all these Japanese exchange students would come, and they would always be like, you just meet them. He speaks Japanese, right? He speaks Japanese quite well, and so he would talk to them, and then they'd all be super interested to not learn English, but to learn Blackfoot, and they would come to him, and he would teach them Blackfoot. So all these Japanese, there's like a segment of Japan that speaks basic Blackfoot if they've been to Canada, or rather Lethbridge specifically, which is like a small city. Is that even a city? Like maybe a large town or a small city in like Alberta. Because like, and he told me this. I was like, what? What do you mean? Why did the Japanese people want to learn Blackfoot of all things?
It's fascinating, I guess.
They're
It's kind of
probably
like the
interested in it.
whole appeal
It's
of it.
really funny because Blackfoot, German, and Japanese have a weird relationship to each other. So many non-Blackfeet speakers of Blackfoot that I know are either German or Japanese. There's a handful of people that are neither, but yeah, it's really weird. For instance, the elder that transferred us our society, do you remember? And I told you the Kit Fox Society a couple
Me
years
or
ago.
Catherine?
I don't believe I've told Catherine, but remember Kobe?
Yep.
He's the leader of that, and the person that we got it from, he's a he's from he's from Germany, and he's like a speaker of Blackfoot, but his like first language is German, so that's one language speaker that I know. And then there's another person that I know that was from the Hutterite colonies. We called her Big Susie because she was a Hutterite. You know what a Hutterite is? It's like the kind of like Amish. And so she spoke German and Blackfoot. And then I remember hearing the story about two German guys that came to the college down here. And I guess they just took Blackfoot for some reason and got really good at it, like fluent in it, and then just went back to Germany. And then Big Susie's brother, I think they called him Crazy Lloyd. I think he spoke Blackfoot as well. And so yeah, there's a couple more, I want to say, German speakers in Blackfoot, and a lot of the linguists that came in the end of the 19th century were Germans as well. So I think it's really interesting that there's just a little kind of a not insignificant amount of German Blackfoot speakers. I think that's really interesting. But also with Japanese, there's a professor, I haven't met her personally, but I've heard of her. I believe she is Japanese. I believe she teaches Blackfoot over in Missoula. And then there's Blaze that speaks Blackfoot and then English, and then all of his students. And then do you remember my student? She was, I don't recall her name, but I remember she was Japanese, and she had to make English and Blackfoot on which one to take, and she chose Blackfoot.
Yeah, I can't remember. I remember that vaguely. She took like a couple months of class and she
Mhm.
stopped, but I remember that. Yeah, I forget her name, but I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
So yeah, there's just a weird relationship between German people learning Blackfoot and then Japanese people learning Blackfoot.
That's so odd. What a
Yeah,
strange thing.
it's such a strange thing, but I think what I think is interesting about it is both of the languages are somewhat similar to Blackfoot. Like German, it isn't quite the same as Blackfoot in the way that they construct words, but I guess in the way that they take all of their morphemes and put it together to make like a Franken word, you could call it. We also do that in Blackfoot. So I'd imagine that like a German speaking brain, it wouldn't be too much of a jump to see how like all of the words can go together to create some strange word. Or with Japanese, a lot of the sounds are kind of similar, and um well, not necessarily the sounds, because we have some sounds that you can't say in Japanese and vice versa, but it's kind of like the cadence of the language and just the way that it flows and kind of the way that the sounds blend together. It sounds somewhat similar to the way that Blackfoot flows. So yeah, really interesting.
Hmm. Fascinating. Well, I know, like, I mean, me and Colton, I know, have to go in about 15-ish minutes. And Catherine, you probably do too. It's getting late in Spain. But
Mhm.
any other topics you guys wanted to bring up? Anything interesting on your mind that you wanted to ask or share?
I don't know. I'm just very excited to talk to you guys because it's like it broadens. Anytime we do these sort of things, or we have a conversation, or we have a class and everything like that, it broadens my horizon so much in the sense that like I get to know how different people do the thing that I like doing, which is learning languages, and I see how everybody's similar and how everybody's different. Is like, to me, it's a delight all the time. Basically, that mm, there are so many things that people can do in order to acquire language, and the languages can be more or less serious, it can be more or less systematic, it can be more or less curiosity driven, but it still works. And it's like, I don't know, that's my conclusion basically.
Yeah, I really enjoyed being able to meet with some people with similar minds and able to kind of discuss these ideas and kind of hash them out, because this is kind of how my thought process works. And remember how I told you sometimes I can stay up all night thinking about something, and it's kind of exactly like how this happens. But imagine you two were like me instead, and it's just like three of me to myself. um but yeah, this is kind of one of my favorite things to do, as a matter of fact, is just to sit down with people and then hear their thoughts on everything, whether it's especially on the things that I find really interesting, like language, reality, truth. And it's especially enriching because both of you are from really um, interesting and rich backgrounds. Whereas, in Montana, even though I can find people that have, like that are like minded, they're just from Montana, they're just cowboys. But you guys, speak multiple languages, you speak, you have all of this experience with the world, and you bring different viewpoints to the table. And I think it's really interesting when all three of us can kind of mush
I
that.
feel like honestly, it'd be interesting if we did like, I don't know if you're interested, by the way. If you want to think about it, that's fine. But it just occurred to me because you said that, Colton. It'd be kind of interesting if we did like a three. It would need to be a 3-part series probably, where we
Mhm.
like one person's the focus for each one,
Hmm.
and we just like ask that person. Or it's like, okay, Colton's the one being interviewed, and like, what do we want to ask Colton? And like, we don't. So me and Catherine don't share any like things from our lives. It's like
Mhm.
all questions because I mean, well, we all know each other actually quite well. So, because you guys have, I always forget you guys have classes together, so you guys know each other
Yeah.
quite well too. So we see each other all relatively often. So, um, you guys know this, like we've all come from super different backgrounds. Like Colton's from like rural Montana, like Blackfoot community, like like I remember going to visit you there, and I was like, this is like a different world. Like this is like if I grew up like this is so different from even like when I lived in France in a small village. Like they're both small town, like small town vibes, but they're different small town vibes, like really different small town vibes. And then Catherine, like we've talked about you growing up with like English and Russian and then learning Spanish at a young age, and then like I haven't asked you enough questions about your rocker days. Like I'm so curious of like how did you get into rock? And like I want to talk about your black magic, and like
Oh,
people are
well,
gonna like hear that and be like,
it's
what
practical
what?
magic. It's not even black. It's practical. Like
Like
before
your
people come for you, before like all the energies come, bad energies. We don't want that. No, I'm joking, obviously. But yeah,
like
just
your
regular
magic, and
practical
like
magic.
I have so many questions for you, and I have so many questions for Colton, and I don't know. I'm not sure if you guys have questions for me, but I definitely we can do a
Totally.
two-part series for sure. I have a million questions about you two. Like, hey, so
I think it should be a three-part because, like, I'm sure that being at Colton and being at me, we can come up with 1,000 questions to ask you, even though we do know you fairly well and everything like that. But I guess in a more informal sort of like podcasty style, and it's kind of like a one-on-one conversation almost. Why not? I'm down. I don't know, Colton, how about you, but like I'm
Yeah,
100%
that's
down.
fine.
it sounds funny. It just sounds. I feel like you guys have so many interesting stories that would just be hilarious. That would be like, wait,
Yeah.
what? Like I feel like Colton, you probably like slept in a river and like we don't even know it. Like something like I would not be surprised. Like, yeah, I slept in the river this one time. Like, why? Well, I fell asleep and then like I can totally picture this wild story of you sleeping in a river and like and I
Colton
don't
is
know
a
why
very
that came
good
to mind.
storyteller as
But like
well.
it just be like, what?
Ugh.
Slept in a river? What do you mean?
That's going to be golden because like Colton tells the stories, any story. It can be ranging from the most trivial to the most fascinating in such a manner that it's like completely like, yeah, it is slippery in a river. What about it? Like I'll just tell you the story straight on to your face, and
Like
you can be sitting here like, wow, that's amazing. And then he would be like, well, yeah, I am the only person who, one of the few people who can teach and teach Blackfoot grammar. Yeah, what about it? I'm just sitting here. And it's do you realize how fascinating that is? But that's
yeah,
the,
like there's this time like I think I told you this, Colton. So but and Catherine, we've talked about this. So Colton had I think it was 3 jobs. And so like
Mhm.
I thought so one was teaching Blackfoot, one
Uh-huh.
was like digging holes, and the third was something in a museum. And I remember this one time like so Colton we had a meeting and like he was in his digging holes job. And I'm saying it for comedic effect, but that's essentially what he did. He dug holes. And like
Yeah.
there's like the movie in the book Holes, like that was Colton. Like that was he just dug holes. And like he zoomed me from this place and I saw the field and I was like, oh okay, yeah, he dig holes, great. And then one time I mean with Catherine, we were just talking about Colton. I was like, yeah, he zoomed me from his hole digging job. And Catherine's like, what do you mean? And I was like, oh, he digs holes. She's like, no, he doesn't. I was like, no, I've watched him dig holes. She's like, no, he works in a museum. I was like, no, I'm telling you, this guy digs holes. I've seen him.
but I
No,
see you in the
York.
museum, you know what I
I've
mean?
seen.
That's not, it doesn't match.
And then I was like, and then we like have to ask Colton, like, yo, Colton, like, what's up? He's like, oh yeah, I actually got like a few different jobs. And it's just I don't know, like Colton's life is surrounded by funny little quirks like that. That it's like he told me in passing, like the way you phrase things, Colton, is just so funny. I don't know if you do it on purpose or not.
Amazing.
I have no idea, but you phrase things in such. And I don't know if you know they're funny. So like, just I haven't told you this, Kath. Actually, I did tell you this, Kath, and then you told me how he missed his interview. Like it's like what? So he told me, like, oh yeah, I'm just like I don't know if I told you. I was like, what? Yeah, I got like 3 jobs now. I was like, what? I thought you only had one job now. Yeah, well, I kind of got this job at like MIT and like this job at oh I forget what the other one was, but I was like, what? Like, yeah, I kind of just got them and then that's I don't know, just the way you phrase it is so interesting to me. It's like so funny.
Yeah,
You could
daily
you're a
life.
comedian, and I don't know if you do it on purpose or not, but it's glorious.
That no, I don't. I mean, I do try to be funny in a sense, but I don't think I really see myself as that funny. And I think when I think what I say, I don't really think about them that much. I'm just like, oh, well, maybe they'll think that funny. Maybe it's just something lame because I'm not really that aware of like how different my life is to everybody else's. Like I'm obviously like aware, but I don't really think about it.
Hmm.
And so to me, just saying something like, oh, well, yeah, I have 4 jobs and one of them is at MIT, it just seems kind of boring to me, because it's like, oh, well, you saw how everything led up to that, the story behind that. But to everybody else, it's like, work at MIT? And I don't really like feel the magnitude of like, oh, well, yeah, that is incredible. And it's not that I poorly of MIT, it's just because one of my personal values is humility. And so I kind of prefer to kind of think of everything as like, oh, well, just no biggie. And but that kind of translates to me saying some of the craziest things with like no reaction, and everybody else is just like, what? And so yeah, that's kind of how I became who I am today.
The first class I watched you teach ever, and it might have been the first class you taught for me. I don't know if it was, but I think it was the first class you ever taught. It was like online for the Katimvik group, and like I'd never seen you teach before, except for when you taught me for your interview. But like I never seen you teach, not me, and like you hadn't really taught that type of class before, and like there were problems in the class, but in the sense of like the things you can improve. But the thing that stood out to me the most was that like you were just funny, like you're teaching and you're just funny. I was like, you're funny, like you're making them laugh, and like, and then I was like, I don't know if he's trying, but you didn't say anything to be trying. Like, you guys remember the Kolton? Wait, were you there? Kolton, were you there for the Amazing Race?
I don't believe so.
Why weren't you there?
I
can't remember.
Probably something's strange. No, I don't believe.
No, because you were gonna be there. Now I don't. You told me you weren't gonna. Anyway, it's not important. So, like, Catherine, you were the Amazing Race guy. Like, he's kind of funny, but like, he's clearly learned.
Yeah, he's a professional.
He's a professional. It's a persona. And then here's Kolton, like.
Something strange. I'm cracking up literally as we speak. I have like a red in the face, and
Why didn't you just? I think you're just completely you. Like, so before we start, actually, you guys might remember, if you're watching this, the recording, you'll notice Kolton's shirt is now dry. But at the beginning, I don't know if it was dry by the time we started recording. He just like, he just had this like big, like splotch. And before we started, I was like, "Yo, Kolton, what's up with your shirt?" He's like, "Your answer like, your answer was like, oh, I was just like braiding my hair." And in my head, I was like, what does braiding your hair have to do with your shirt being wet? I was like,
no, obviously, no. If you wash your hair, fellow.
No, I get it, but it's just it was just this whole, I don't know, man. Logical there. It was just funny, like just the way it was, just the whole delivery. It's not what you said; it's how you said it. It was just like.
Oh, definitely should do Kolton first. I think the first episode of the trilogy has to be Kolton.
Okay, if Kolton's okay with that, I'm totally okay with it, because you're just.
Sounds fun. Yeah, I definitely think the reason that I say so many funny things is because the way that I think about language, the way that I grew up with language, is everything is kind of context based. And so you can say something like, oh, well, I was braiding my hair, because they'll understand, oh, well, your hair was wet, it was over your shoulders. And so something like that makes sense. So it's like, oh yeah, I was braiding my hair. And so I think it's because a lot of the way that I think about words is just like with a lot of context packed into each word. And but I don't think I ever realized that context is specific to me because of like how I grew up and because of my experiences. And so I kind of use this language with different meanings that like make sense to me. And so sometimes I'll say something to someone and they just start laughing, and then I'll be like, I wasn't really trying to be funny, but yeah, I guess that kind of does sound funny. Like, if
but you know what's interesting? I have a student that I teach, and she's like a relatively like a pretty strong level of Spanish, and she's in our class. We watch this stand-up comedy course that's taught in Spanish. So every class we share screen. She's bought it. She shares screen. We go through it, and when there's words she doesn't understand or stuff she doesn't really get, I help her understand. So we just watch it. So we're learning about stand-up comedy together in Spanish. And one thing they said in stand-up comedy, which is interesting, it sounds like what you're saying, Kolton, is what she said is they write their whole bit, right? They write their whole joke, and it's like a page long. And then she walks you through a process to condense it So one page turns into like 3 sentences because you condense it and you use the right words. This is going full circle, which is a great way to wrap it up. Full circle to what we're saying of like finding the right words to communicate the message, and that becomes a perfect communication tool. I mean, at least theoretically. And they condense it and because they condense it in such a way, it's just funny because you get the right message, and it was a funny story, but you condensed it in the exact right words, and it makes you laugh. So she was telling the story of like, well, I hate when someone has like an ugly baby, and then they like, you go to their house and you kind of walk in the door, and then they kind of show you the baby, and then you're like, I don't want to see this baby. But then she condenses this whole thing, that's this whole rant. She condenses it into like 3 lines, and she's like, I hate it when you go like to someone's house and they have this like ugly baby, and then they like make you look at it, and then you're like, and it's like,
And it just works. It just works this way.
Laughing. I was like, that's just so funny. But she took that
because it's all about context.
Like 3 little phrases to get a whole page, and it's like funny, right?
Yeah.
So,
Interesting.
yeah.
A lot of things to talk about.
Yeah.
Like I'm physically shutting myself up right now because like.
Yeah, I gotta zip it before I start.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for doing this, guys. It was fun. Thanks for, if anyone watched this whole thing, I mean, literally I did this just for fun. I don't know if anyone watched. I don't really care. I was like, this will be fun. I'm just gonna do it just because this would be a fun conversation. But all right, well, stop the recording. Thanks for watching, guys. Anyone that watched, made it this far, thank you.